As dawn broke, the tranquil banks of the Heroic River became the scene of an extraordinary discovery. Locals, out for their morning routines, were halted in their tracks by an immense, unfamiliar form sprawled at the water's edge. Among them, Nolan, a wildlife blogger, could hardly contain his excitement as he approached, camera in hand, anticipating the rare find he was about to document. Yet, the moment the experts arrived and peered closer, Nolan was taken by absolute surprise when he first saw the strange creature. But before we start, smash the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The creature had first been spotted by an older gentleman who was walking his dog. He was too afraid to get close to the discovery, but he did snap a picture of it and shared it both with the authorities and some of his friends in town. Nolan was among these friends, and when he saw the photo, he wasted no time in heading to the remote water's edge. He had no idea what he was dealing with, but he was afraid that if local authorities got there before him and would prohibit him from getting close. It was only about a 20-minute drive through the forest on his motorcycle. Nolan took the most direct route he could think of, even though it was not exactly easy to traverse those small paths on his bike. The older man who had first snapped the photo was still there, and a couple of other locals that Nolan recognized. But at least the police were not here yet. Nolan quickly took out his camera and approached the creatures. The closer he got, the more he figured that he was dealing with a dinosaur or something. As he got close enough, he could even swear that he saw some of the body of the creature go up and down. With his hands shaking, Nolan pointed his camera at the creature and snapped a couple of pictures. But after only managing to take 5 to 6 pictures, he was suddenly shaken up by the sound of loud sirens quickly getting closer. The police were finally here, and Nolan knew that if they spotted him near the creature with his camera out, he could be in real trouble, and so he started to run back to the other locals, hoping to not wake the beast with his quick footsteps. Nolan is surprised by the amount of officers who are quickly flooding the scene. He did not even know the small town had this many trained officers. Not much later, a bigger black van arrives, and a couple of individuals get out of the car dressed in what looked like hazmat-looking suits. Nolan suddenly starts to regret his decision to get so close to the animal a lot. Officers move through the crowd, their eyes sharp and alert. Nolan shuffled back slightly, trying to blend in with the other locals, keeping his gaze low to avoid drawing any unwanted attention. An officer singled Nolan out and approached him, hand extended. "Phone, please," he said. Nolan's mind raced, but his hands didn't tremble as he pulled out his phone, thumbing through it quickly before handing it over. He made sure the photo app was buried under others, and the recent snaps of the creature were nowhere visible. The officer's eyes narrowed as he scrolled through Nolan's phone, tapping into various apps and flipping through the gallery. Finding nothing incriminating, the officer handed back the phone. "Stay quiet about today," he warned sternly. "Don't talk to the press, don't post anything online. We'll be watching." Nolan nodded, relief washing over him, but the weight of the warning kept his nerves on edge. Finally, the police began to disperse the crowd, allowing people to leave the area. Nolan pocketed his phone and glanced back at the scene. The hazmat-suited individuals were busy around the creature, now covered by large tarps. With a deep breath, he turned and walked away, his mind buzzing with questions and the urge to uncover more about the mysterious creature. This was far from over. Nolan slammed his front door shut and beelined to his cluttered desk. He booted up his old computer, its fan whirring loudly in the silent room. With determined clicks, he opened up browser tabs and started typing in searches for unidentified river creatures and mysterious animal sightings. As website after website loaded, Nolan navigated through scientific databases, frequented online forums, and scoured news articles. With growing frustration, Nolan opened his email and drafted messages to several wildlife experts and a few well-known cryptozoologists. He described the creature carefully, avoiding specifics about the location to maintain some level of secrecy. He hit send, leaning back, his eyes tired from the screen glare. Hours passed, and Nolan's inbox remained empty of the replies he hoped for. He sighed and shut down his computer, the screen going dark with a quiet hum. No closer to understanding the mysterious creature, he felt the weight of unanswered questions heavy on his shoulders. Nolan fetched his camera from his desk, his fingers trembling slightly as he turned it on. He scrolled through the photos he'd snapped earlier, each click bringing up another angle of the mysterious creature. Satisfied with the quality, he transferred them to his laptop, preparing to share them with someone who might understand what he had found. Nolan decided on an expert named Mark, who had a reputation for being open-minded about mysterious sightings. He drafted a careful message, attaching a blurred preview of the creature to pique Mark's interest without revealing too much. He hit send, his heartbeat quickening with the hope of a response. It didn't take long for Mark to reply. His message was filled with intrigue and a keen interest in the blurry image Nolan had sent. "This is fascinating," Mark wrote. "I'd like to see more. Can we meet?" They exchanged a few more emails to iron out the details, and soon a meeting was set. Nolan felt a surge of relief and anticipation. Finally, someone who might have answers. They agreed to meet at a quiet local cafe the following afternoon. At the cafe, Mark leaned over the laptop, studying the images of the creature that Nolan had taken. He zoomed in on each detail, his eyebrows furrowing in concentration. After a long discussion and many scrolls through the images, Mark looked up from the screen. "We need to see it up close," he suggested, his tone serious. Nolan nodded in agreement, both understanding the risks involved. They needed a plan to revisit the site without attracting attention. In the quiet corner of the cafe, Nolan and Mark hatched a plan for a secretive night visit. They sketched out a route on a napkin, marking the quieter paths to the riverbank. Later that evening, Nolan rummaged through his storage, gathering equipment. Finalizing their plans, Nolan and Mark agreed to meet near the site just after sunset. Nolan and Mark arrived at the riverbank to find the area transformed. A large tent now covered the site where the creature lay. The tent was cordoned off with bright yellow tape, and several police cars were parked nearby, their lights off but presence undeniable. Carefully, they kept to the shadows, observing the setup. Security officers patrolled intermittently, their flashlights sweeping the ground. With cautious steps, they circled the perimeter under the cover of darkness. Eventually, they found a section of the fence less illuminated and covered by thick bushes. Mark gestured to Nolan, pointing out the spot as their best chance. Taking advantage of a moment when the guards' backs were turned, Nolan and Mark ducked through the bushes, their bodies low to the ground. They moved silently, careful not to disturb the branches. Once past the fence, they found themselves only a few yards from the tent. Inside a dimly lit storage area, Nolan and Mark stumbled upon several unused hazmat suits hanging on a rack. Quickly, they donned the suits, adjusting the fits to cover their features completely. Armed with newfound confidence and a discarded access card found in the storage area, they approached the security checkpoint. Mark flashed the card nonchalantly to the guard, who barely glanced at them, mistaking them for late-shift scientists. They walked past the checkpoint with a brisk, purposeful stride, trying not to let their relief show. The inside of the tent was starkly lit, with only one scientist busily moving between tables cluttered with equipment. Nolan and Mark entered quietly, blending into the sparse activity seamlessly. Keeping their heads down, Nolan and Mark moved slowly around the tent, their eyes alert for any opportunity to locate the creature. Finally, they spotted the creature, temporarily left unguarded on a secluded examination table. They edged closer to the creature, their movements cautious and calculated. As they neared, they could see its intricate details, the scales, the color, more vivid than any photo could capture. Its skin was cool to the touch, scales detailed under the bright tent lights. He moved around it, taking in every aspect he could, his mind racing with questions and the thrill of the clandestine moment. Meanwhile, Mark positioned himself near the tent entrance, his eyes scanning the area outside. Abruptly, the tent flaps burst open and police officers streamed in, their faces set and determined. Nolan barely had time to step back from the creature as they surrounded him and Mark. It became clear that the scientist had not been convinced by their cover story and had alerted the authorities. The police moved efficiently, their training evident as they secured the tent. Nolan and Mark exchanged a glance, realizing the gravity of their situation as officers began reading them their rights. The possibility of a simple escape was now out of reach. Handcuffs clicked around their wrists, cold and final. He was guided into the back of a police car. His mind worked over the details he had observed, considering what it all could mean. Each sat handcuffed, gazing out at the passing streetlights that flickered through the barred windows. Upon arrival at the station, Nolan and Mark were quickly led through a series of heavy, secured doors, the sounds echoing starkly off the linoleum floors. Once inside, Nolan asserted himself to the attending officer. "I need to speak with the commander immediately," he stated, his voice steady. "It's urgent. I have critical information about the situation tonight." The officer eyed him skeptically but noted the request in his log. Nolan sensed the importance of his findings could potentially alter their predicament if only he could convey it effectively. Nolan was eventually escorted to a small, stark interrogation room and left alone. As Nolan settled into the cold metal chair of the interrogation room, the door eventually swung open and two officers entered, their faces set in stern expressions. They took seats across from Nolan, their badges glinting under the harsh fluorescent lights. One placed a digital recorder on the table, pressing record, signaling the start of something official. Nolan straightened, preparing to share what he knew, aware that this conversation could change everything. "I have a picture of the creature," Nolan began, his voice steady despite the tension. "It's stored safely at home on a secured drive." The officers exchanged a glance, their interest piqued. Nolan continued, explaining how he had managed to take detailed photos before the site was secured, hoping this information would lend credibility to his next claim. With confidence, Nolan leaned forward, locking eyes with the officers. "I believe the creature is a fake," he declared. The room seemed to pause at his words, the air thick with surprise. He laid out his observations about the creature's unnatural features, each point delivered with conviction. After a moment heavy with tension, one of the officers finally nodded, conceding, "You're right. It is indeed a movie prop." Nolan's eyebrows rose in surprise, his suspicion confirmed. The officers explained that it had been part of a film set that was mistakenly left behind and not properly cleared. They'd been trying to manage the situation discreetly to avoid any unnecessary public hysteria. The officers detailed their initial concerns about the discovery, causing a public uproar. "Our main goal was to keep this under wraps while we figured everything out," one officer admitted. They worried about the spread of wild theories online, which could lead to panic or a flood of curious onlookers and conspiracy theorists swarming the site, complicating their efforts. Acknowledging Nolan's accidental involvement, the officers began discussing how to proceed. "We understand you stumbled upon this unknowingly," they stated, assessing his level of engagement with the situation. They emphasized that his cooperation now was crucial and would be beneficial in resolving the matter smoothly. Nolan listened, a mix of relief and concern etched on his face as he realized the implications. Relieved yet somewhat frustrated, Nolan listened as they outlined their next steps. "We'll be disposing of the prop discreetly to avoid any further attention," one officer explained. They planned to remove it under the cover of night, possibly returning it to the studio or destroying it to prevent further incidents. Nolan felt a complicated sense of closure, knowing the creature was just a prop all along. The officers assured Nolan that his cooperation had not gone unnoticed. "Your willingness to work with us will definitely be taken into account," they affirmed. They hinted at the possibility of his prompt release, provided he maintained discretion about the incident. Nolan nodded, understanding the stakes. The assurance offered him a glimmer of hope as he considered his next steps after leaving the station.